Welcome to your deep dive. We're really diving into some fascinating territory today, with tech investor and, all around fascinating guy, Chamath Palihapitiya, from a really interesting Joe Rogan Experience episode.
Yeah, this one really jumped out from your research list.
Well, yeah, I mean, you specifically requested this one. I think you said you were fascinated by how technology and education kind of intersect, right? And man, this conversation with Palihapitiya, it really goes there.
It does. It does.
So I think maybe the best place to start is with this analogy that Palihapitiya uses. He talks about how being bombarded with news and social media is basically like mainlining sugar,
Uh-huh.
which, I mean, come on, we can all relate to that feeling, right? Like you're just mentally fried after scrolling for too long.
Totally. And it's like a bad diet in a way, right? That
Yeah.
constant influx of information, especially when it's coming from algorithms that are basically designed to keep you hooked rather than, actually informing you. It's exhausting.
Yeah. And he even gave this example about how the same topic, I can't remember exactly what it was, but the same topic sparked completely different reactions on Threads versus X, Twitter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like way more agreeable on Threads and then just, well, you know how X can get.
Right, right. Total dumpster fire sometimes.
Yeah.
But so are you saying this difference is because of the algorithms feeding those different platforms?
That's what he's saying. Like, they're designed to prioritize engagement above all else, even if it means sacrificing, nuanced and factual reporting. And honestly, it makes you wonder what it's doing to our ability to actually think critically about the information that's coming at us, you know?
For sure. It's something I think about a lot.
And this ties directly into your whole interest in education, right? Like, how do we even begin to equip ourselves and, future generations to navigate this insane information landscape?
Well, exactly. And that's where Palihapitiya's argument about traditional education, the one where it's all about memorizing facts and figures becoming obsolete, really resonates.
Right.
Because what's the point of memorizing something when you can just Google it?
Right. And he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that we need to be focusing on something totally different. He calls it judgment and taste.
I love that. Judgment and taste.
Mm.
It's not something you see on a syllabus every day.
Definitely not. So, walk me through this. What does he mean by judgment and taste?
Okay, so he's essentially talking about developing your bullshit detector.
Hmm.
Like being able to sift through the noise and figure out what's actually true and what's just noise. Knowing when to trust your gut.
Uh-huh.
It's about making decisions in a world where there's just so much information, so much uncertainty. And honestly, it's a skill that's becoming more and more valuable, especially when AI can basically outperform us in just pure information processing.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we need to cultivate that inner compass, right, to guide us through all the noise.
100%. And he actually grounds this whole concept in a really personal story,
Hmm.
talking about how he and his ex-wife handled his son's ADHD diagnosis.
Oh, yeah. I remember that part.
Yeah.
He talked about how they basically threw out the traditional playbook, right? Like less screen time, more holistic approaches.
Exactly. And it just makes you wonder if our current system, with its emphasis on medication and standardized testing, is really setting kids up for success in this new world.
It's a huge question, and it actually reminds me of all the research you've been doing on alternative approaches to education. So it seems like we're talking about a pretty different vision of education, right? One that goes way beyond just memorizing facts and figures.
Absolutely. And this is where Palihapitiya's optimism about AI really shines through, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because honestly, AI kind of freaks me out a little. Robots taking over and all that.
I get it, but Palihapitiya has this really interesting take. He sees AI as this incredible tool, especially in fields like medicine, where it can analyze massive amounts of data and help doctors make better decisions.
Yeah, he mentioned AI-assisted surgery being almost error-free, which, I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Right. And it's not just healthcare. He talked about AI revolutionizing material science, too. Imagine buildings that can adapt to earthquakes or spacecraft components that can withstand insane temperatures.
Okay, now you're just messing with me. That sounds like something out of Star Trek.
I know, right? But Palihapitiya is convinced that these aren't just futuristic fantasies. He actually gave some concrete examples of how AI is already making these breakthroughs possible.
See, that's the stuff I love to geek out on. Okay, but let's be real for a second. What about the whole AI taking our jobs thing? That's got to be a concern, right?
He doesn't shy away from that at all. He acknowledges that AI will definitely automate a lot of routine tasks, which could displace a lot of workers, especially in certain industries.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he argues that this could actually be a good thing in the long run.
How so?
Well, He believes that as AI takes over those more, what did he call them, perfunctory tasks, it'll free us up to focus on more creative and strategic work.
Okay, so kind of like a what, humans and AI working together situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he stresses that it's not going to be all sunshine and roses.
Yeah.
We're going to have to adapt, learn new skills, and embrace lifelong learning. Which, knowing your interest in the future of work, I know you've thought a lot about this too.
Absolutely. Like, how do we even begin to prepare for a job market that's constantly evolving? It's a big question. But, for all the talk about AI, Palihapitiya also brought up something much more immediate, much more, well, frankly, terrifying.
Oh, you mean the whole global conflict thing?
Yeah. Like, that's not exactly light dinner conversation.
Not at all. And that part really hit home for me, especially given your interest in understanding, like, existential threats. We can get so caught up in the day-to-day, the latest tech gadgets or whatever, that we forget about the very real dangers out there.
It's like you said, we're sleepwalking into disaster. Those words, man, they kind of sent chills down my spine.
Mine too. And it makes you wonder, like, are we doing enough to address these threats? Or are we just burying our heads in the sand?
Yeah, and I think that's where his personal story comes in, right? The fact that he escaped a civil war as a child. That experience has clearly shaped his whole worldview.
Yeah, makes you realize that these aren't just abstract concepts, like war has very real consequences.
Absolutely. But, in typical Palihapitiya fashion, he doesn't leave us completely despondent. He actually offers a glimmer of hope, suggesting that we need to, radically rethink our priorities.
Okay, so what does that look like? What's the alternative?
Well, he basically says we need to shift away from this whole military-industrial complex mindset and start focusing on, true global challenges. Things like climate change, poverty, disease.
So instead of pouring all of our resources into weapons and defense,
Yeah.
we should be investing in like sustainable energy solutions, global health initiatives, that kind of thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine if we put the same level of ingenuity and, let's be real, funding into those areas as we do into, building the next fighter jet.
I mean, it's an inspiring vision, for sure, but is it realistic?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But here's something interesting that Palihapitiya brought up. He's noticed this trend, a kind of convergence of thought leaders and politicians from all sides of the political spectrum who are starting to find common ground on these critical issues.
Wait, really? Because it feels like everything is so polarized these days.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's actually quite fascinating. And it kind of gives me hope. It's like maybe, just maybe, we're finally starting to realize that the stakes are too high for all the partisan bickering.
Okay, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
But it sounds like Palihapitiya is saying that it's not just about politicians and world leaders figuring this out. It's on all of us, right?
100%. He's a big believer in personal responsibility, in being an informed and engaged citizen. Questioning the narratives that we're being fed, seeking out diverse perspectives.
And that reminds me of something else he talked about. This idea that we need to be willing to confront our own biases. He even talked about how he had to do that himself when he was trying to understand, the whole Donald Trump phenomenon.
Right. And that's something that I know resonates deeply with you, this idea of bridging divides and having those tough conversations.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to stay in our echo chambers, surrounded by people who agree with us. But real growth, real progress comes from engaging with viewpoints that challenge our own.
It all comes back to that idea of judgment and taste, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Being able to think critically and make informed decisions, even when it's uncomfortable.
Man, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the perils of the information age to the potential of AI, and of course, the very real threats facing humanity.
We did, didn't we? And I think what struck me most throughout this whole conversation is that Palihapitiya, for all his, sometimes provocative opinions, is ultimately an optimist.
I think you're right, because even when he's talking about these really complex, sometimes scary issues, there's this underlying belief that we can figure things out, that we have the power to create a better future.
And that's a really empowering message, don't you think? That the future isn't some predetermined thing, it's something we create together.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up. A huge thank you to all of you for joining us on this deep dive.
And remember, keep asking those tough questions, keep seeking out new perspectives, and most importantly, keep diving deep.